At a human level, right? It's such a superior experience.
Definitely, without a doubt. Better conversation also. Plus, seeing each other, there's those little emotional takes everything. Yeah,
For sure.
All right, I think we should
Are we
start.
good to start, bro?
We're good to start. All
Okay.
right, so today we have a very, very good friend and a very interesting person on the podcast. He's a Stanford graduate. He has a background in computer science and economics. He worked in academia for a bit, where he did research at Stanford before transitioning to do research in industry at Microsoft and Amazon. He also worked as a data advisor for the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare in India. He then shifted his focus to working on startups. He was on the founding team for GetSaffle, where he was working on streamlining user experience across blockchain platforms, and they raised somewhere near $5 million from investors. He then went on to be the founder of Clinikally, with the goal to make hair and skincare accessible and affordable to all. Clinikally has users over 700 cities in India and is making an impact in the lives of millions across the country. Around 50% of their customers are from Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities, where access to healthcare in general, but skincare in particular, is almost non-existent, showing the immense impact that Clinikally is having. He's also on Forbes 30 Under 30 in retail and commerce. So it's an absolute honor and pleasure to have Arjun Soin with us on the podcast today. Just to get us started, quick question: how do we fix Rohan's skin?
First of all, a pleasure to be here with you guys. Thanks for the very generous introduction. I think you guys really onto something with this pod, so very excited to be chatting with you. Second of all, for Rohan's skin, the cliche answer would be you should go check out Clinikally. There'll be multiple pathways. He'll be told to either consult with a doctor. He will either be told to take a quiz or a diagnostic basis the issue he's facing. He'll be given a full slate of products in both the pharmacy and the beauty worlds. And so that's on a plug basis, that's what he can do. But obviously consult a doctor, consult a physician, but look after yourself in terms of, sleep well. Diet's important. Don't get too stressed about the podcast. It's going to go great. But yeah, all in all, look after yourself, even beyond skin, just general health wise, and you'll see how much it sort of radiates and reflects back.
That's quite a bold statement after the weekend we've had. You can hear it in my voice and you can see it in my face.
So then don't have weekends like that. That's the non-cliche answer.
See, health is important, but then just enjoying yourself, vibes, that's important too. But no, I like that answer, and there are a few things to dig into that, especially with the various different options that you offer on your website, the AI consulting. Also, the fact that you've managed to make it so affordable for everyone. I think it's 249 rupees for a consult with an actual dermatologist. But before we dive into all of that, I just want to know how it all started. What got you interested in this space, in healthcare in general, and just what your journey at YC was like.
Yeah, for sure. So I've sort of always broadly been very fascinated by, healthcare, been very taken in by it. I was 14, 15, decided, just short of, last few years of school to not become a doctor, though I grew up with actually doctor parents, and that, still remains my foremost inspiration for wanting to create impact in and around healthcare. And so kind of fast forward to, I'd say, 3.5-4 years ago, right after I finished Stanford, both my undergrad and masters, the first thing I was doing was basically digital health. First at a startup based in Palo Alto called Curai, and then largely through 2020, 2021 at Microsoft, out of their Seattle office, but it was remote at the time, and working with one of their teams called HLS, which is Healthcare and Life Sciences. And even there, the mandate broadly was, sort of in the intersection of AI and digital health, try to help physicians realize different kinds of solutions that made their lives easier and kind of, in consequence made patient and care delivery enhanced. So I've always been very interested in healthcare, kind of undergrad also studied economics, focusing on healthcare. When I picked up computer science and turned it into a master's, the foremost thought in my mind was, how do I sort of use it positively towards healthcare, health systems, and sort of medtech in that sense. So it's not kind of too surprising that I'm doing what I'm doing right now, obviously deeply and core inside the consumer health space. But it's always been, very close to my heart. It's always been a large part of what my, academic and technical thoughts have always been dominated by. So that's generally kind of how I've arrived at what I've arrived. But the sort of deeper story is, largely 2021, with COVID happening, I decided to come back and spend some time in India at home with my family, while, I still had a day job in the US that was remote. And I ended up spending a bulk of 2021 back home, working through the nights. And one of the big things that dawned upon me that I realized through the days was that, there was a lot happening in the consumer space in India within, of course, the constraints of, COVID looming, but also with the constraints of COVID, accelerating a lot of processes. So, for example, telehealth in fields like dermatology, in fields like nutrition, in fields like wellness, that have largely always been viewed as touch and feel areas. Telehealth was suddenly opening up. Along with that, there was obviously a growing online pharmacy, e-commerce market. And so sort of the thought was, through my mom, who's a dermatologist for about the last 30 years, she had to have her clinic shut down through COVID. Through her experience, from her vantage point, we started Clinikally as a side project to help her patient base, her immediate patient base, sort of avail a curated set of specialized dermatology and wellness products, as well as a telehealth platform for them to connect with the doctors that weren't giving them that touch and feel experience anymore for obvious reasons. So I'd say middle of 2021 until the end of 2021, we tried this out, as a side project. The idea was simple, just kind of bundle up like a dermatology focused online pharmacy and a telehealth platform, provide access via digital consults, products at their doorstep. And that caters to a large part of the dermatology workflows that people were not being able to avail in the offline world. And I want to say March 2022 was sort of the next phase in that journey, when it evolved from being a side project to sort of like a more serious, full-fledged thing of its own, which is when I got accepted into Y Combinator. With some traction, we'd seen a lot of, cool, organic word of mouth traction for the platform. So that's, I think, one of the things that did help push my application through, the fact that we went in with traction. And then that also connects to the second part of your question, which is what the journey with them was like, right? Because we went in not pre-idea, not pre-revenue, but with a fairly well-defined and solid foundation for what we were building. It was a platform that basically put online pharmacy and telehealth together, but for a verticalized niche. For like derma and wellness at the time. We hadn't even started kind of tapping into nutrition. So the journey was interesting in the sense that it's not your sort of, bread and butter, or iterating on product, user feedback, trying and failing, building things that don't scale. The journey was more of like, we came in with a good amount of traction, had access to phenomenal mentors, capital at the end of the batch, got a chance to meet, folks that were building very interesting companies that 2.5 years in are now, up there in their spaces. I think those were some of the key takeaways for me, right? Like in many ways, it felt like Stanford on steroids is what I tell people. Because I met some of the most incredible set of my people in my life that I've kept in touch with, that are all kind of in different industries, building tech, solutions to make people's lives easy. And I think that's one thing that really stays with me, is like the fact that I went in with a fairly mature product into YC made it possible for me to actually just explore outside of what I was doing and kind of learn what others were building. While, like I said, gain access to mentors that I've remained very close to, which was basically the set of partners that looked after my investment at the time.
Okay, so the reason for you to go, is it fair to say that the main reason you wanted to go to YC was the environment, not necessarily the funding? Because you could have probably raised that here too.
I would say, I'd say no, it was a mix of both. Okay. The environment shaped up and is now something in hindsight that I can say was a major takeaway.
Okay.
But initially it was just, because I'd spent 6, 7, 8 years in the Bay Area, very sort of familiar and comfortable with the environment there. I had a bunch of friends in college that went through YC. So that was actually just for me, the default option if I was starting anything in any corner of the world to avail capital and mentorship. So no doubt it started, purely as a thought for this is how I think I want to raise capital. And it consequently then opens up access to larger pools of capital from other investors that are watching YC companies. So it started out purely with that, and I obviously did a couple of applications in 2021 before I finally got accepted the second or third time in 2022. So the sort of ambition there was purely capital, along with obviously great mentorship.
Of course.
But I think the one thing that I at that point in time held in very high priority was raising enough capital that I could at least justify starting to transition back from the US to India, given everything I'd sort of built up, community, network, previous jobs in the US, sort of just, as opposed to just leaving that, getting up, going one day, instead thinking of it as a more systematic thing. And YC really enabled that as well.
Okay.
Right? Which is to say that I'd sort of been commuting back and forth, 2021, 2022, building the company out of here, but largely talking to investors in the US that were all, within immediate reach through the network I'd built up, after having worked and studied in the Bay Area. So it was also just, kind of the world that I'd known, the world that I'd had my formative academic years in. So hence that was kind of where I defaulted to when I thought of, where I'd get my first set of backers from.
In that journey though, you spend a lot of time in the Bay Area, and you mentioned that a lot of your enablement was because you were there for so long, you were surrounded by those people. Were you always kind of rooted in wanting to do your own thing, or was having been there something that really drove you to doing what you're doing now?
I'd say being in the Bay Area at Stanford specifically was a huge catalyst, right, to this idea that the ultimate way of adding value to society, to the world, is if you go out there, start something that provides a previously unprecedented experience,
right,
to some part of society, whether it's businesses or consumers. That whole idea solidified at Stanford. I mean, I never thought of, I thought of things in very core professional terms. I grew up with parents that were both doctors, and I always thought that you'd end up being an engineer, you could end up being a doctor, you could end up being a lawyer, and that would...
Wow, alarm. That's my bad.
That's okay, it's okay.
Go on, sorry.
So, I thought that idea of branching out from thinking in more conventional terms towards thinking of, starting a product, a service, a business as a way of advancing oneself really got solidified at Stanford. But I think it happened very early.
Right. I want to take it back though, because you went to Stanford with a mission, and very few people in their lives will make it to that level of going to an Ivy League, forget Stanford University. How much of that was, I guess, something that you were chasing, or it was just almost a byproduct of everything you had stacked in your life over a period of time, and you ended up being at Stanford University?
I would interesting. I think it's a great question, and the way I put that is it was more of I went in with very preconceived notions about what I thought I'd do,
right,
and narrow almost. I actually ended up applying for and studying for the first 2.5 years largely economics on the policy side.
Okay.
So I went in with a very different set of ambitions. I was broadly very interested in policy. I thought I'd be doing research at a think tank. India, the idea of moving back to India, was always very appealing to me. But I always knew, and I think that's one thing that hasn't changed. Even 2 years ago when I sort of crafted this whole way I was going to transition back and build Clinikally, and that underlying initial idea was that if I came back to India, at that time I thought it would be policy, research, and work at think tanks. It would always be with some meaningful amount of knowledge and competence that I could also bring value to the table and not just move back on an empty slate.
Right.
That idea, I think, remained very much the same. It just, all those years later was channeled in a very different way, in a manner whereby, okay, I'm going to have, YC or a set of US investors back me in what I want to build in India. and bring that conviction across borders. So it just changed dramatically. But I think the underlying idea that if I moved back to India, I'd have to move back with solid, like, ammunition for what I want to do. That remained the same. But obviously the sort of ambition, the technical skill set, worldview changed a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
And you were connected to people from like all over the world. So I'm sure the ambition that you went in with was only elevated once you arrived, because the kind of things you see at Stanford University are so bubbled up where not everyone has access to that, right? The network,
Absolutely.
the things that people are doing.
Experience I feel that I always tell people I only have in this lifetime now. Like it's such a rarefied experience, one that I'm truly grateful to my family, all my mentors, for the people I met there for, that it is truly like the one thing I'm always going to be grateful for, the one thing that will always keep me rooted, always keep me grounded, knowing that I had an experience that a lot of other people don't have the opportunity to have. I think it truly was very special. It shaped me in a lot of ways. But it also kind of, like you said, like you touched upon this, opened, sort of broadened my horizons to that idea, was that, there were people from across the globe there that had all accomplished so much in their own right, just the time we started college, and will probably do a lot more. So I think it really broadened my horizons to that idea of just going out there and taking risks.
Were you ever intimidated?
Yeah, I'd say throughout, right? Because I met the type of people I met, one would never have imagined, in one's wildest dreams.
For example?
So for example, like we're talking about my company. So the one example, and this is why I was saying the sort of ambition of, perhaps starting one's own thing was fortified so early on. One of the first people I met at Stanford, happened to be this Indian guy who obviously was second generation immigrant. His parents had moved there, I want to say like 25, 30 years ago, grew up in the Bay Area, had been doing kind of research on, AI and medicine, specifically focusing on kind of, the electrolytic properties of one's bloodstream that enable just, quick finger prick blood test. So essentially kind of the stuff that Theranos was working on back in the day. And he had been trying to build something in that space since, I don't know, high school, 10th, 11th in high school. And that in itself gives such an interesting perspective, because, one was not hustling as much in high school at all. It was more about, grades, checklists, doing well, keeping your teachers happy and all of that. But there was just people like him that had such, elevated sense of ambition, but also the sort of willingness to go and execute. So this guy drops out freshman year, starts a company that is essentially trying to do like quick, cheaper, more modular, more portable blood tests. So very much overlapping with what Theranos did. But I would say with backed by real science, published science out of Stanford's various AI labs. Of course, the FDA tightened down on technologies like these, because that time when I started Stanford was just when Theranos imploded. So him and his co-founder, they had quite a tough time navigating the space. Their FDA approvals would have probably had to wait for like half a decade.
Wow.
So they ended up getting into, healthcare software, remote patient monitoring, healthcare software, revenue cycle management, billing. And fast forward today, they're a $1.5 billion company. This friend of mine was one of the first investors in Clinikally. Right? So and this is someone I met maybe 4 or 5 days after landing in the US in September 2015. So it's not just the sense of like, you meet people that are on a different level, but it's also the fact that you can build such a lasting connection with them. That 10 years on now, he's my one text message for any dilemma, right? Be it like a engineering team, a scale up, a fundraising deck question. So that's, I think that's that's one great example. There's a lot more that come to mind, but I think that's one that's most relevant to my life even today, if you think about it.
That's rare to find.
Yeah.
And that you'll only find in, I think, environments like that.
Yeah, exactly. And mind you, he never came back to school after freshman year.
It's such a Stanford story.
Yeah.
It's the most Stanford story that I could have heard.
So I barely even saw him on campus, even though I stuck around about 5.5 years, did both my undergrad and masters, right?
Wow.
Interesting. That's an incredible story.
You should actually get him on the pod. His name is Tane.
Okay.
He's based in He runs the company called Athelas. I'll have
Okay.
him chat with you guys.
Tana, if you're hearing this, please.
Yeah.
It's an open invite.
We'd love to have him. Before you started Clinically, what was the process for someone who's looking for skincare? What was the process for them like? How much harder was it? And how did you manage to streamline that entire process and get it down to something like 250 rupees for one consult, and make it accessible to everyone, especially in like these tier 3 cities where they don't really have access to dermatologists at all?
So I think the thing that we found very strongly in all of the market research, the need finding, soul searching we did, through the time of piloting this in 2021, was that like skincare, hair care, core skincare, hair care that together make up dermatology.
Yeah.
To some extent are just for context related to or cross sort of cross sell and co-indicate very well with nutrition and wellness, were very like fragmented experiences, right? So think about it this way: you would get like maybe a dermatology consult on a Practo. Your prescription could have one product that was, let's say, a sunscreen or a serum for like an acne or a pigmentation, and I mentioned those because those are conditions that are a little more aesthetic in nature. So you'd have like a product that is OTC and beauty. And then you could have like a core like pharmacy product, like a regulated drug, as well as, because ultimately dermatologists do write a lot of drugs in their prescriptions, as well as OTC products. So you would have like a beauty product from a Nykaa, a drug that you'd get from a 1mg or a PharmEasy, or like your local pharmacy, and the consult from Practo. So it was a very fragmented experience because there were basically platforms that were, let's say, verticalized to beauty, like a Nykaa or a Purple, that were delivering value across the entire beauty stack, and some part of that happened to overlap with dermatology, so you'd get some part of your prescription there. Same for 1mg PharmEasy, targeting like general medicines, core general medicines, and really pioneering the idea of e-pharmacy. And then some part of that maybe overlaps with dermatology as well. And so that fragmented experience is what we actually realized we had set out to overturn, whereby now we are kind of an online pharmacy first platform, but one that also kind of caters to your entire skin and hair care stack, whether it's prescription grade, whether it's beauty, whether it's semi-beauty, semi-prescription grade. So that entire slate of products is what our verticalized pharmacy sort of lives by, right? Towards the consultation part, and I think I mentioned this earlier, but we were seeing a lot of like very strong sort of COVID tailwinds for telehealth, for digital health, and specifically in fields like dermatology, wellness, where they're always conventionally being viewed as like touch and feel experiences. But a lot of doctors did start, trying to do consultations informally through WhatsApp, and that's one of the things we saw when we were doing our need finding through my mom's practices, is that the appetite, even amongst physicians, for consultations for dermatology was increasing, just because there was a realization that like broadly, 35-40% of encounters at skin and hair clinics are just a combination of in-person consultation and product prescription. And so that flow we were able to replace, as well as like having a fragmented experience of something from a beauty platform, something from a 1mg, something from a PharmEasy. The consultation being affordable, I think, is a deliberate choice. We do sort of seasonally vary between, let's say, like a 250 and a 400, though it broadly still remains very affordable. That's because I'd say with our teleconsult feature, we are largely bridging an access gap. And that's why today you'll see 70% of the consultations we do through our platform are in tier 2 and tier 3 cities. And then what ends up happening is we are able to cover up for that consult, or the fact that it's slightly lower priced, with the fact that the eventual outcome of a consult is a full-fledged treatment plan. That is going to be a combination of products used in a very specific way, right from morning to night, right from whether you're pregnant, whether you have certain lifestyle, family medical conditions. So it's just that idea of kind of like making an informed process, an expert-driven process around the standard commerce or e-pharmacy platform is, I think, what we have really set out to try to champion.
Interesting. And I also see you now have another option of an AI consult. You just take a quick survey and you get results and an actual entire plan on what you should be doing along
Did you
with
try
the
that?
product.
The
I did
treatment
actually.
plan?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
And it was very interesting. I'm curious as to how you managed to, especially in healthcare, get something that you're confident is very accurate and gives good advice. Just because I feel like if you get something wrong, especially in healthcare, right, the
Say
downside
something.
to that can be pretty disastrous.
Absolutely. A very valid question, and so I think I'd just like to caveat that whole feature, right, with the fact that it's basically supposed to be kind of a proxy for a consult. It's not so much an AI consult as much as it's like, we call it kind of an automated treatment plan or an automated diagnostic.
Okay.
Because they're not actually consulting you. There's not actually a doctor human in the loop. And the recommendations from this feature, and I also kind of just do a little bit of a deep dive to describe it for your audience, but the recommendations will always only include OTC products. It'll never have a schedule regulated drug as a recommendation. So for example, if let's say you have hair loss or you have severe acne, that feature of having taken a quiz and described your condition through multiple choice questions will never, throw back a minoxidil, which is, a hard drug for male pattern balding for hair loss, or it'll never recommend, like, let's say a tretinoin, which is another regulated drug that people use for acne. It'll only recommend OTC products, products that are, again, specialized dermatologist recommended, but aren't prescription grade. Or don't come with the level of side effects. They're always controlled in terms of their ingredient balance, right? So that's the first caveat. And essentially kind of how that works is we've worked with a lot of doctors in-house to create and approximate treatment plans that map from people's, self sort of described issues, through answering, comprehensive set of 15-20 questions, map from those answers to like a rough approximate suggested treatment plan. So if you don't want to go through the whole process of booking a consult, spending 20 minutes on a video call with a doctor, why don't you try out this feature? It'll ask you about 15-20 questions about the very deep specifics of your issue, about, again, like climate conditions, family history, medical history, anything else that's relevant. And then it'll give you back a treatment plan as well as how to use that treatment plan across the day, across however many months. But the caveat being, obviously, it's not as personalized as a doctor consult. And it's not as focused on curing as a doctor consult is. Because at the end of a doctor consult, you could have an actual prescription with drugs that may have side effects, but will be needed for curing. And that'll obviously all be dealt with adequately, professionally by the doctor. So that's kind of how this works, is that, we've found it to be more valuable for people on the aesthetic side of things. That, let's say I have, patches on my skin that aren't very serious, but, there's something I'd want to be getting rid of. And for those patches, what sunscreen should I use? It's that, as opposed to like, I have a PCOS or pregnancy related acne issue that you would want to get a serious consult for. And how we do the sort of AI part of it is basically a more sophisticated rule set engine, right, under the hood.
Okay, so it's like a decision tree.
It's essentially, it's not a machine learning model. It's got potential to be a machine learning model, but right now it's just a decision tree that essentially maps from all of your, potential pathways for how you've answered your, the questions about your condition to whatever products our doctors think work best. And those products are obviously across brands, across price points, and across, different types of usage criteria.
And is the aspiration to make it operate as a machine learning model?
Yeah, I think as we kind of learn more and more from, let's say, the combination what people are answering versus whether they've bought, what kind of queries we've got from their answers. We also have a lot of data from prescriptions that we've written that map actual diagnoses to, let's say, gender, to age, to other notes from the doctor, to the final treatment plan. So that I think has real potential to be turned into some sort of a machine learning model, or perhaps even, and this is one of the things we are experimenting, is perhaps even be used as fodder for like fine-tuning an existing LLM.
Oh,
right,
that's
which
very
is
interesting.
because this is basically
Yes.
the data we collect from consultations, the way we write our prescriptions is proprietary data.
That's
right?
true.
So,
Yes.
so there is very real value in just throwing that on top of an LLM with some sort of a vector database set up on the side, or fine-tuning LLM, and then coming out with an even more valuable tool for users that can be like a kind of a derma-specific engine, so to say.
Yeah, RAG seems like a good use case for that.
Exactly.
Because
Exactly.
You have all of the data for it.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
I am very curious though.
So this is like a preview of that,
Yeah.
the sort of quiz thing you should think of, right?
Okay.
It's also just like a cool feature to, again, make us a little more accessible, make us a little more fun as a platform.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's what gets me very curious is your core TG is tier 2 and tier 3.
For the consultations.
Right. With something like this, how has the reception been with just what you've done so far with your core TG, and how do you feel like, I guess a machine learning model is more intuitive to us. We understand it, we'll be able to use it, it'll be fun. But to that kind of audience, is it going to be as intuitive? Is it going to be as easy to navigate? Or do they just prefer the
hope is that it will be.
Okay.
And one of the things that we've maintained a lot of focus on while designing our interfaces and just going through our UI UX process is making a lot of our interfaces, especially on the non-product side, because the product sort of interfaces are very standardized. There's models for how people want to do their online shopping and or even see like a prescription upload feature.
Right.
But for the consultation interface or the quiz, the goal has been to keep them very simple, very usable, not too confusing, not too technical. And then I think to your question, I think more like tangibly what we've seen is that it's just the consultations that are more heavily leaning towards tier 2 and tier 3 cities. On a platform basis, if you see our marketplace, if you see our private labels, they're all, I'd say, about 60% tier 1, right? So then my guess would be is that especially a feature like this, given it's also geared towards higher tickets and higher AOVs, and we've seen that so far when we've largely just been piloting it right now. We haven't launched it in the sense that we haven't marketed it.
Okay.
We put it on the platform for visitors that are just scrolling and browsing like yourself to use it. But the feedback we've collected also has been from users from larger cities,
Right.
that would understand or have, like you said, like perhaps have a deeper mental model for how to use something like this. But that core, like doctor consult, talk to a doctor, get the right type of story is very heavily selling in the tier 2 and tier 3 cities, especially given the price point for the consult.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and that's also why, like, comes to the meat of one thing I always tell people is that we actually try to build like a something for everyone platform, right? We have transaction sizes that are as low as 250, as high as lakhs on a single order, right? Because we do a lot of specialized imported dermatology products, as much as we do a 250 rupee consult.
Right.
Okay.
So I think another very central idea to us is that we're building for many different TGs.
And
many
you
different
also
TGs.
just launched your Lux model.
Yeah,
Which,
and so that's again geared towards like our high ticket sticky users that are perhaps less interested in getting a consultation, but have like a set number of products, high-end products that they use very staunchly, right? A lot of which we have championed and pioneered online and brought online that didn't previously exist. So there's also a bit of a unique supply chain story that's shaping up in how we build Clinically Lux, especially.
You said that you're trying
Very
to.
interesting.
You said you're trying to build for a bunch of different kinds of customers. When you just started off, did you have that broad view, or were you just trying to narrowly focus on one particular segment, just get that right, and then kind of expand off of that?
I think it was definitely initially we didn't start with that broader view. Like I said, it was just a side project for a very specific
Okay,
patient
yes.
population that was going to be able to have the ability to spend. Though that same ethos at scale may have limited the number of people we could have gotten to. So
Yeah,
over
of
time,
course.
the view became broad. We saw there was a real demand, real appetite, even beyond the big cities of India. So the consultation feature, we then started trying to focus and target not just on smaller cities, but also on, let's say clinical issues and conditions that are more prevalent in these cities, right? So a lot of our doctors that will do a teleconsult have at least 5 to 7 years of experience in clinical dermatology, in areas of clinical dermatology that one finds people have more of an appetite to want to get treated online in tier 2 and tier 3 cities.
You mentioned that you started this as a side project. What was the point where you said, fuck it, I'm gonna drop everything else and lay all my cards on the table for this?
I mean, in like very simple terms, simple unequivocal terms, I think it was basically the initial set of capital I raised, which was just getting accepted to YC. And knowing that, somebody was there to back me. And I wasn't, like I've said before, wasn't just kind of, jumping back on a plane without having, serious financial backing for what I had started to envision could grow into a big platform. Right? So I said just that initial bit of, pre-seed capital to sort of give fuel to the ambition is what was my point of like, okay, now, I can at least go give this a shot.
Right.
There's people sending me back with some money to go and work on this idea.
Were there people who didn't believe in you in the process?
Yeah, that's always going to happen, right? I think I will have to say though, I think the people I worked with, through internships, through the 2 years that I was actually in the workforce in the US after I finished my master's, and the mentors I had there were most supportive, right? Because they'd heard so much about India, about my upbringing there from me over the years that I met them, that a lot of my mentors I met at internships, at my job, I had, professors that I'd done research for, they were the most enthusiastic.
Right.
That okay, he's always been very passionate about India. We'll now go and start something, and that'll give us another lens and something else that's exciting to follow. So that, and a good number of them ended up becoming angel investors very early on as well in the journey. But to your question about people that didn't believe, I think there was a fair share of them, largely in the set of investors that we had spoken to early on. But that's generally how it pans out, is right. Like I had hundreds of conversations. To some, the idea had merit. To some, we were wasting our time. Probably, should have thought of this 4 or 5 years down the line. So that was always going to happen. But I think largely, and this is one of the things I feel very grateful for, is the people in my life that mattered a lot were very supportive.
Right.
They're very supportive. And it was also kind of a matter of me reaching out to a lot of my mentors, people that, I'd looked up to over the years, and letting them know that I was going to embark on this new journey.
Yeah, no, literally, I feel like we're going to ask the same question, that he's mentioned mentors a lot.
Say.
No, mine was going to be slightly different. So my question was going to be, so you mentioned that, growing up, you always had that lens of, oh, you should do a job, since your parents are doctors, that the traditional route.
Yeah.
And so how did they feel about you dropping out from that traditional route and going and pursuing something of your own and trying to solve that problem?
I think so. Obviously, it comes to my mom. A large part of why I started working on this was to introduce a substantial convenience into her life, right? From her having gone through some pretty tough times with not having a practice open through COVID. So it was a very different lens for her.
Okay.
Given that this ended up being initially when it was, just kind of being beta tested with her patients. And she'd run a very popular practice for years. So it actually added a substantial element of uniqueness to the kind of work she was doing and her being able to do her work during COVID.
Right.
So that was a kind of very different lens. Obviously, endlessly grateful that she supported me, was able to help really craft the initial foundations for what this company was going to look like. Given she stepped in, helped out with the clinical, the medical foundations of, which direction things were going to be taken into. I think with my dad also, since he's a surgeon, he's basically, spent the last 30 years of his life saving people in the OT. and has just his relentless focus on what he does. There's no other way he could be doing it. And so for him also, I think one of the things that I found very exciting and fulfilling was that he was just kind of ready to hop on this journey with me, but kind of on the sidelines, experiencing entrepreneurship vicariously through myself. The whole sort of raising venture, scaling a product, hiring people, getting the word out there through LinkedIn, acquiring users, building up teams and strategy. I think that's something he's really lived through me vicariously and had great discussions on, given his background has been quite the opposite. So I think that was one thing that was very fulfilling, kind of when I look at the experience my parents have had, and that continues to be the case. And I think one other thing I'll touch upon is that even I think growing up with both of them as doctors, and me not ultimately being too sure if I wanted to pursue medicine, there was never a moment in our lives when they would have forced me or urged me to do it. It was all left very open. They realized I had a bunch of interests that I wanted to channel across different spectrums and different industries and walks of life. So they were always very supportive of that. So it's been a very, very kind of like sort of supportive both ways, where I feel like I've learned so much about them, so much from them, just about work ethic, rigor, being good to people, saving lives literally. When and sort of in return, all these years later, when I'm starting something up, running a business which is very different from what they've done in the conventional sense. My mom obviously kind of branched off on her own about 12-13 years ago to run this practice, but I feel that they've also learned and evolved a lot in the process through the discussions we've had. But when I went to the golf course when I was 15, 16 maybe, I started playing golf and I saw Ribhav play golf. And he looked very cool. I said, this is maybe another aspiration I could have.
Did he almost inspire you, or did he want you to start
No, he
playing
inspired
golf?
me. I saw his golfing attire from top to bottom, and I was very fresh to the sport at the time. I said, oh, this is another thing I could do, man. If it makes me look that, swanky and cool like he does.
It's the one thing he's got going for him. Looking swanky and cool on occasion.
Your Adam golf putter.
Oh yeah, I shall have
How
that.
funny is it that I remember that, huh?
Wow, dude.
I will never let that putter go. It's my favorite club.
What is it? The long.
Dude, it had this yellow grip
Yellow
to
grip,
it, right?
still
So it
have
was
that,
just so striking. It was such a visual experience. I somehow I've never forgotten it.
I can't believe you still remember that.
I have a weirdly eidetic memory.
Yeah.
So
You should be in
came-
suits, bro. You remind me of Mike Ross. That is incredible.
Wow, the yellow putter from Batman.
I think we should get a 3-ball in.
We should definitely get around
before we
this.
leave. You can see my swanky attire as well, dude. You can see my swanky.
done. We'll do it.
You mentioned. I want to touch upon this. The theme in your life seems to revolve heavily around support, mentorship, family. Like everything you've done has had a very close circle around you that you've been able to cultivate so well that they've almost propelled you to the next thing and the next thing. Even if it's subconscious, it's helping you in some capacity, right? How have you, over a period of time, been able to pick good mentors?
You're right, same question.
That's like I honestly appreciate that you pointed that out. Very accurate. It's actually a combination of it being subconscious and me over the years realizing that it is it's essential, it's paramount to have good mentors that one can look up to, and obviously now consequently as well as be that kind of a mentor that someone can look up to. So that obviously comes with the idea of giving back. The former comes with the idea of, I feel like that just helps put a lot of my ambition in perspective, right? And kind of ambition across different facets. So no matter what it is, if I have somebody that I can look up to, that somebody I feel has done things in the right way, the right manner, be it personal, be it professional, right? Be it navigating, having lived in India and the US, or be it like purely personal, right? Somebody that's, let's say, navigated like a challenge, a relationship, some sort of trying times in a certain manner. So I've always like had this conception of having mentors that can really sort of put things in perspective, but also give you added motivation and meaning. That's been a big part of who I am. And like you said, right, it's obviously at different points in my life has been something that has propelled me forward, and something that I've personally now started relaying back, and I try to mentor young new founders in my own way whenever possible. I think it's now manifested in interested shape and form. I was just telling Ribba, we've like set up a little bit of an entrepreneurship and residence program within Clinikally, within my office.
Oh, wow, okay.
So we help sort of first time founders, usually 2 or 3 teams at a time, just 1-2 person teams that are very fresh early on in their journey, with just office space, compute, product mentorship and whatnot. And I do devote about 2-3 hours a week to that now. So yeah, I think that's a very big part of who I am. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of this is now going to start shaping up, especially as we move along with my company, but I also meet more and more people that come and want to ask me how things are done, how things are kickstarted.
Right. You also started your own business when you were very young, and I think the younger you are, you seem to not be risk averse at all, which is great. You pushed yourself. You went to Stanford. In that period, and you're still incredibly young, doing incredible stuff in this country. The navigation of challenges must have been so many and so many different variables. How did you get through those, and what were some of the biggest challenges you had to face getting through just building a business in your early 20s? Likely surrounded by a lot of people here who weren't doing the same thing.
Yeah. That's I think that's definitely something I spend a lot of time thinking about, especially in the early stages when you're thinking about, sure, I'm going to build this product, sure, I have this traction, sure, I'll raise this money, but outside of that, am I going to be surrounded by like-minded people? Or even in the first few things I mentioned, am I going to be able to maybe at least raise some capital to fuel growth for my company, convince people to back me, like you said, this early on in my life, carry along with me the fact that I moved back from the US at a time when COVID was happening. A lot of businesses were being started, so many businesses were being funded, not sort of falling into what could be called a bandwagon at the time. There were so many challenges at the time that one navigated. I think, again, I'm going to come back to this. It was great to have mentors supporting me at the time. Most notably, I'd say at the time, my partner at Y Combinator. She's great. Her name is Surbi. She started a biotech company in her late 20s, sold it to Boston Scientific, when she was 33. And what they did basically was they came up with this tool to do non-invasive diagnosis of ovarian cancer. And it was the first tool that has FDA approval that can essentially extract genetic material from the fallopian tubes to give you a much more concrete idea of whether or not you have ovarian cancer. And she made that her life's mission after actually having a false diagnosis as a 14 or 15-year-old, right?
Wow.
So I've spent so much time just kind of hearing her story, talking to her about, how she feels healthcare is evolving globally, how she made her life's mission to build basically a product, a medical device around, a personal struggle, but also something women across the world face, which is sort of uncertainty of diagnosis in that particular type of cancer. And she also helped me navigate a lot of day-to-day, actual, operational challenges. When we had started YC, we had to incorporate the company in the US, start a subsidiary in India. There's a lot of extra legal work, that one perhaps should not have been involved in so early on in the journey. So she was a great mentor and sounding board, right? So that's I think one I'd say person or avenue that helped me navigate through a lot of challenges early on. Even at a product level, those ones are a little less sort of exciting, interesting to talk about, but sort of shaping early team, budgeting yourself. I used to travel a little bit because YC was happening partly in person that summer. What milestones to focus on, just really like shaping early thinking, early foundations for just how to like run a business, how to run a company, certain frameworks of thinking that actually become very second nature as the months and years evolve. So I think that was a big part of it. When there was sort of a period of 3-4 months, I want to say like summer of 2022, when whatever YC had happened, we raised a little bit of money, but then there was that big challenge of, okay, now I actually have to figure out how to work and live in India in a starkly different manner than how I did the last time I was here.
Exactly.
Full time. So that was another part of it. And I guess you guys are aware too, like, one growing up in Delhi and then now being back in Delhi again, there's not as many people, I'd say, on the same journey.
Exactly.
Right? So I think that in itself has been, I'd say, one of the things I've had to overcome the most. And not because it's a bad thing or anything, but it's just that, sometimes just being surrounded by like-minded people helps with staying motivated, feeling like there's others on the same journey, on the same boat, perhaps facing the same struggles, same day-to-day operational technical challenges. There isn't that as much of that, but I will say, and I'm very grateful, I think Gurgaon, where I'm predominantly based now, is shaping up to be a phenomenal sort of startup ecosystem. I actually make it a point, I've had a clear philosophy for the last 1.5 years since I've spent majority of my time in India, is that I meet 1 to 2 new people every week, but at a founder coffee catch-up level, right? So I think that's one thing that's helped me sort of feel more enthused rather than less at the end of the week about, okay, someone's doing something really cool and I was able to run into them. I also do very actively, and this is selfishly so, but I do very actively keep in touch with the people I met in the Bay Area and at Stanford.
Absolutely.
So I was giving you an example of my friend Tane, who started the sort of blood diagnostics, turned into healthcare software company, who I'm still in touch with. He visits me when he's in India because he's got a sort of big office set up, I think, between Bangalore and Noida. So that's just one example, but I have like 4-5 of my friends that I went to college with that are, them or their funds are early investors in Clinikally now. So they keep up with me on that front. So very actively, sort of digitally more so, and to whatever extent I can make it to the US, which I usually go just to kind of catch up with investors about a month a year. Very still actively involved with my community at Stanford in the Bay Area, which is hard to do actually. 5 years out, I graduated from undergrad about 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And that's been a big part of still feeling that, like that the sort of energy I surround myself with is one of constant learning and insight.
I love that.
Right?
I think
that's
we
another
both
one I do.
resonate so much.
But I mean, like, I've met some really cool people. I also do spend a decent amount of time in Bangalore.
Right.
And I think there the density of, people just building cool companies is slightly higher.
Okay.
But it also kind of has its downsides, right? In the sense that there's still a versatile mix of people in and around Delhi NCR, which you kind of miss in Bangalore. Everything there is startup. So there's too much homogeneity in that sense. But that's kind of like my little diversion on what you guys had asked on challenges. But I think, like surrounding myself with like-minded people is, challenge or not, is something that I always do want to maintain, I'd say. As I navigate not just my startup, but kind of just how one is evolving and growing personally.
Right.
You touched upon the business solving problem aspects that became second nature over the course of a few months.
Yeah.
But initially, because you have a very extensive background in CS and research, medical research. How did that mindset shift come about, and how did your approach to solving problems change when it came from just CS and the tech background to now business challenges?
So I think that's a good question, because like one of the early examples is, right, because I knew CS, I could program, at least put together a basic first iteration of Clinikally. At some point it dawned upon me, and this was through YC, that I was spending a lot of time, just coding myself not enough time actually trying to build and forward the business. So that's one thing I realized through my early investors and partners and brainstorming sessions with them, is that I perhaps, as we were getting more traction, should start taking a back seat on like the hands-on programming and coding work myself, and perhaps hire, or at least some early version of getting a consultant or freelancer on board. So that transition actually happened much later than it should have. In hindsight, that's one of the things that I would have started to sit out of earlier rather than later. I mean, like I said, even today I oversee tech, not so personally involved in programming myself. I still do manage to do about 10-15% of my time allocated to it. But initially, when that was like 90-100, but I wasn't getting a chance to do like business things as much. Right, so you're right. It was kind of like, it was an advantage for sure, because I was able to hack things together very efficiently, knowing the CS, knowing the stuff I'd seen, general background in healthcare research and policy and whatnot. But it was also kind of like a double-edged sword, right? Because I'd then be insistent on wanting to just perhaps build out to like 10 lakh users just myself and not another engineer in sight. So then that's a very like tangible dilemma or challenge that I faced, right? Because kind of getting off the code base, at that point in time, to my mind, was an added source of worry, because then I won't know if things were happening according to my conception or vision of it. But then not leaving it myself could then also amount to, okay, there's not enough happening on the marketing or the fundraising or the strategy side. And this, in that sense, kind of also doing this as a solo founder, compounded those challenges a little bit, right? Which is that when I was fundraising, I wasn't kind of actively adding new features to the platform website at the time. Or there were days when I was just kind of on the website. And then obviously one also learns a lot about like time management, right? And getting sort of your scheduling in order, because it's such a new space, right? Like no matter where, how, when, what the circumstances of you starting a business, and especially a business that has like some aspect of tech enablement in it, it's such a new space to just sort of budget specifically your time and productivity more than anything else, in a manner that isn't actually scheduled out from you from day one, like a college or a curriculum is. It's more like it shapes up from day one to day end.
Were you always really good at figuring shit out because of your background, or did you feel like you groomed yourself to figure non-technical stuff out better once you started the business?
I'd say definitely learnt a lot about non-technical things, right? Stuff that I'd never really directly been involved with previously through academics or even internships. So I mean, that obviously does come with the sort of interpretation that I was not as good at non-technical things and had to sort of pick them up, figure out, learn along the way. But I think I've always had I don't believe that I'm good at it, and it's always a learning and evolving process, but I've always had a knack for like working through things, right? As in first principles thinking.
Yeah.
Which is like you kind of learn a little bit about what the concept or the topic at hand is, trace it back a little bit, and then kind of come back to square one and then go forward towards the solution. So for me, that I think just thinking first principles has helped a lot, especially with picking up sort of ad hoc, non-technical things. Of course, that's how I'd say that's how a lot of my technical education was sort of imbibed in me, but for non-technical things also, it's worked out interestingly well.
That's interesting, because I think, at least personally, that is one of the things I struggle with generally is, I founded a startup during university as well, and I'm working at a startup right now, is that when you're technical and you're continuously working on the product and actually coding and creating the product, whenever you come up with any challenge, or why aren't more users using the product, you never really think about it from a business perspective. You think about it, if I make the product better, if I give this feature to it, and then you just go deeper and deeper into actually creating it and focusing on that rather than actually building and scaling your business. And so that's a very interesting mindset shift that I'm assuming that you had to have,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm trying to figure out how to navigate now. So that was it's
Yeah.
interesting to hear your perspective on that.
I think also it's then about like, you kind of ideally want to be in a space where, at least in the early set of teammates or members you bring on,
Yes.
some of your earliest colleagues should ideally have like a mix of skill set, right? So that then
Yes.
when you're delegating or when you're working with one or the other, that at least that sort of is a commitment device, or it forces you to sort of split your bandwidth across technical, non-technical, or sort of funding, operational, whatever the different sort of directions that you'll be pulled into.
So it's interesting that you say that. So what would you say is a better skill set to have when starting your own company? Should you be hyper specialized and really, really, really good at something, or just a generalist?
I think it in a lot of ways it depends on, and I honestly believe that it depends on what it is that you're starting, right?
Okay.
Like the domain area, the industry. I would err away from giving a too much of a generic answer to that, just because like if you're going out tomorrow and starting, let's say a biotech company,
Yes.
where you want to try to diagnose ovarian cancer more reliably. If you're a generalist like jack of all, there's not much you're going to get done, and there the stakes are the highest. You're talking about high stakes in healthcare, right?
Yeah.
So it definitely depends on what area it is you're starting out, but having a mix of generalists and specialists, ideally through a team, co-founders and whatnot, is the best place you can be at. But there are products like, when I think of my friends building, deep healthcare products or biotech products, drug discovery, cancer immunotherapy type of thing, you would want them to be specialists. Otherwise,
Of course.
that's not going to clinic, right? Or it's not being commercialized. But then if you think of people that are starting, let's say, like, in my space, consumer health, or brands, for example, or even like consumer tech. So like, the sort of social network type of wave that happened. There you perhaps want a little bit more of a generalist mindset, right? Because literally from day one, you are starting to think about tech, marketing, branding, finance, operations, all, within the framework of a single day schedule, right? As opposed to, I'm just going to be in lab, trying out this drug on mice until I need to try it out on humans, and then do a phase 1 and then do a phase 2. And then when I need to commercialize it, I can get somebody who knows a little bit of finance and strategy. So there's actually very different mindsets that I think are opportune for different spaces.
Within that realm, though, at least in your domain, I'm sure there's a lot of specialist skill set involved. But with what you're doing on a day-to-day basis and thinking about so many different variables of the business, different people, how do you prioritize your days so that you operate the most efficiently?
This is something I'm still sort of learning, building up a framework for. There's like founders that have accomplished so much more than me that I'd want you guys to also ask, so we can double check on the validity of my answer. But how I do things right now and kind of where I'm headed is, my sort of priorities are usually very topical and germane to what's happening in the business at any given point in time. So for example, 2 years ago, when I was raising my sort of my seed round coming out of Y Combinator, a lot of my energies were focused there. I was trying to get that wrapped up fast so that I knew that then there would be money to actually build and scale the business. And the team was also quite small at that time, so other things that needed to be prioritized were happening through my early team members being very hands-on, very involved on things that naturally then I came back and started looking into. Like let's say marketing or sort of, platform development, beta testing and all of that. So right now I'd say kind of my priorities vary like week to week based on what's happening, right? So for example, festive season, next 2 months, we're thinking of a lot of campaigns around, we're doing corporate wellness programs for, employees, offsites for employees, where they can kind of meet some of our dermatologists and understand about the platform, awareness campaigns. There's other things you plan, like kind of, offers for free second consult, festive stuff, right? So I'd say a little more of my mindset is now thinking in terms of marketing and branding, right? But then we have sort of upcoming launches for both our iOS and Android apps, Jan Feb. So I think suddenly like Jan Feb will then become very Eng heavy all of a sudden. So I think my priorities right now remain, very topical to what's happening. And then kind of in more material terms, Monday, I'd say like Monday and Friday is more for self-work. So I'd knock everything out in terms of emails if I have to respond to, people from within the team, if I'm working on, let's say, a deck for something, special projects. And then like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, right now I kind of assign, one day for engineering stuff, engineering website, product stuff, one day largely for marketing, and the other one is for operations. So that's kind of how I do it right now. I know it's going to change, it's going to evolve a lot, but that's the sort of current thinking I have on my prioritization.
Well, you touched upon this a little bit before, one of your habits of trying to meet one or two new people and new founders every week. What are some niche habits like that helped you be successful? 'Cause that's a very interesting thing that I've heard before.
I have a long way to go. I don't think I'm successful yet. There's a lot more that I need to get done. And
You're modest.
I know I'm saying this because I think it's the only thing that, still keeps me motivated and want to, kind of wake up, be grateful for what I've had in life so far, and then start looking forward to where I'm going.
Of course.
But I think one of the things that, let's say, keeps me happy, motivated, and I'd say consistently wanting to get things done, is like the what you just pointed out, right? Is kind of trying to meet 1 to 2 interesting people every week. Usually end up being founders, but even outside of that, like for example, last week I was sort of hanging out with this person that just moved from London to she's now going to look after, she's deputy head of bilateral affairs at the UK High Commission in Delhi. And she's now so we were introduced through like a sort of common connect. And so I spent a bunch of time like hanging out with her. She's now starting to get very deep into like understanding kind of, grassroots level policy across different parts of India. And so that was like, she was kind of one of the 2 new people I met last week. And I just learned, we talked a lot about her work. She's like a British diplomat. So that's far outside of, the space I'm working in or anything I do in my day to day. But it was just kind of a nice sort of, perspective on the outside world, or the sort of bubble outside of which most of my work is happening, or like my day to day is spent. So it could be anyone, but I do actively try to, reach out or have, some time crafted out in the week for meeting new people. And I think it's even more ideal when it's somebody that is, purely outside of my work spectrum.
What is life like for you outside of the work spectrum?
Do you have time outside of the work spectrum? Because this sounds like a lot.
Exactly.
I think I do. I spend a lot of time, like I said, right? I spend a lot of time like meeting people over meaningful conversations like that.
Yes.
I spend a lot of time meeting founders. But this time, I think one is truly fortunate now. We got a team of about 65, 70 people across different functions. So work is delegated. I'm able to now focus on a lot of, higher level strategic things, but also think about like new initiatives, special projects, think about where the company is heading, how to sensibly scale up, and then how to keep kind of hiring and, facilitating an even better environment for the existing 65, 70 people, just in terms of what work looks like, but also what the next set of people coming into the company will be like. So in that sense, like, there is time. I travel, I'd say a fair amount. Like I'll spend maybe 5-6 days in the month between like Bangalore and Bombay. We have small teams between both those cities, as well as like kind of logistics warehouse presence. So that's something I'll do about almost a week, a month. And I think that's usually when I'm in like a Bangalore or Bombay is where I will end up sitting down for like a coffee with somebody that has messaged me on LinkedIn, or that someone's connected me, and it usually kind of happens outside of like the immediate environment that one is existing in, for like, let's say, the other 3/4 of the month. But otherwise, try to get in like some golf 2-3 times a month. That's always been a kind of a big outlet for me ever since I saw Ribha with his ass. But no, try to get in a little bit of golf, and played a lot of racket sports growing up. So now it's like a toss up between a tennis or a pickleball late at night, which is fun. Which is why it's also, I think, like that's one of the things I feel really grateful about is having people that one grew up with around now. And I'm on a different journey, kind of building a startup, but kind of having a lot of friends you grew up around with. It just kind of gives you all these avenues to still go out and take a break whenever you want to.
But do you feel like you've had to filter out a lot of people from your life because you're so laser focused on your craft, and maybe there's people who are slowing you down?
I think not so much, because so I think one big reason for why I try to meet, like, let's say, new people, and sort of forge connections with people that are kind of outside of, like, let's say, the immediate work I do, or let's say the people I hang out with or grew up with, is because it offers like different perspectives and insights, and I feel like that more than makes up for let's say, having anybody that I thought has slowed me down or has not understood kind of what I'm up to. But I don't kind of view things in that sort of light. I feel like in general, like the sort of people you surround yourself with, you should be able to have like meaningful conversations with about every single part of your life, and vice versa. And I feel like in no context do I have people like that don't represent that in my life right now. Well, whether kind of it's in Delhi, NCR, where I spent, let's say, 70% of my time, or when I go back to the US, or even the people I hang out with in Bangalore, Bombay. Though the overwhelming theme, I would say, of like a lot of the people I meet and spend time with that aren't, like, let's say, from my life growing up in Delhi or Gurgaon, are startup people. They're like startup folks building interesting, cool companies. And somebody I may be mentoring, somebody I perhaps am being mentored by, someone I've been introduced to by investors, someone we are kind of collaborating with. They may be a SaaS provider for us. So I've spent a lot of time meeting people in the startup ecosystem, and that's, I think, one of the things that has made me very excited about being in India. Like, it's just kind of how much hustle there is from every side, from every industry, every sort of way of thinking.
And there's so much more money being injected into India,
Yeah.
especially into the startup ecosystem.
Crazy.
Over the next few years, I think we're primed to be at the top of that list.
Yeah.
No
I think,
doubt.
and like we are, like, Clinikally today is a living example of that, right? So I want to say about 80-85% of the capital we've raised is from the US, and like that comes with the underlying idea of, like, sure, I was fortunate enough to go spend 7-8 years there, build up that network, but the most exciting thing about that is just the sort of innate sense of curiosity that a lot of investors that are injecting money in India have about just how unbounded the potential here is, right? And the fact that I have been able to play a small part in convincing them that India is where they should park their money is very exciting. Like, I feel like I've seen it from close quarters, in a very, very small way right now, but in a way that convinces me of exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
That there's a lot of money being injected, and simply because the sort of the way things are growing here, consumer is obviously exploding. There's digital payments, to the tune of billions and billions, high billions of transactions. Like, it's no big deal happening.
Yep.
And obviously India has always been the home for such great engineering talent. We had sort of the whole initial IT consulting wave started out of here, but like the fact that now that very talent is starting to target and innovate in spaces that startups occupy, I feel like it's a very happy convergence of a lot of things that have been waiting to come together.
Yeah. And also in that, like in the money that's coming into this country, a lot more founders, like you said, you had the opportunity to go abroad, but there's a lot of people who don't have that opportunity. And as that money comes in, doors open for people who wouldn't otherwise be able to do that. And so I think the way that I see it is over the next few years, we'll see a lot more talent come out of this country just for that very reason.
Yeah, and I think
Right.
one of the very exciting things is the opportunity that I think is going to be recognized the most strongly is people building like global companies out of India.
Exactly.
And so like you saying, they may not have had the exposure, and one is fully cognizant of that, but they're going to build global companies out of India.
We also run the GDP of the United States, so it only would make sense for us to play a bigger role in our own country.
Do you think how long do you think it'll take India's startup ecosystem to be at par with and even better than the ecosystem you have in America?
I think there's obviously quite a gap.
Yes.
You look at kind of numbers,
Yes.
compare venture funding there, venture funding here. There's obviously a substantial gap to overcome. I think the way I'd sort of phrase that question is it's less of kind of whether in terms of absolute or even relative size we get to, let's say, the startup market in the US and whatnot, because there's companies in the US that have gone on to become the Googles, the Apples, the Nvidias. They're all basically all startups. They're all venture-backed startups 25-30 years ago. The early sort of wave of venture was all fueled through investing in a lot of them and a lot of their sort of counterparts at the time. And they've gone on to become like global $2-3 trillion companies. So like kind of in terms of a pure comparison, right? I think that's the one thing that people always talk about is those global companies aren't being built in India, right? But I think instead of that, I'd sort of flip that instead and say that kind of in terms of the value that is delivered to citizens, the empowerment through sort of technology enablement on maybe like a per capita basis, that gap, that's the gap that we want to fill, right?
That's
I don't know if I have like a quantifiable metric for it right now, but basically like every kind of right from ride hailing to food delivery to digital payments has happened. It's kind of eased out our lives in India, and kind of you're about to move back soon, so you'll see so much of how the ecosystem has evolved even from just when you were here last, before Canada and everything. And so, but like we're talking about digital payments, right? So the kind of transaction volume, number of people transacting is far higher than anywhere else in the world, right? India is supporting that. So in terms of like actual what I find about India that is the coolest is that it's just so incredibly and endlessly diverse, and then to deliver value across different demographics, across different population groups, TGs like we've talked about, that is something I think nowhere else in the world can accomplish, right? And I think that is happening. We've seen that like through Clinikally and the kind of order ranges or spectrum of services we deliver. So I think the thing more is that I'd say everyone's saying like 2030 will be when the value of publicly traded once Indian startups publicly traded will touch I think it's already 50 billion right now, right? And that let's say that'll probably touch, it's already 50 billion. I mean Zomato in itself is like a 28 billion, right?
Yes,
so that's publicly traded companies that were once startups are now 50 billion in value, which is really massive. You think about it, that's a significant chunk, right? And so then that I think that's a good metric, right? Because that is showing you kind of on a percentage basis how much of the stock market or just publicly traded equities it occupies. And then I think by 2030, I think people are expecting it to go at least 2.5, threefold from now. So I think that's, but in the process of that happening, it's like people are being empowered across all ends of the spectrum. So I think the thing to think about it is, right, because I used to think about things in this space that like this sort of consumer health wave that we are riding now, through having built a very efficient like skin and hair care platform with not raising much capital. That maybe happened in the US like 6-7 years ago when companies like, Curology, Roman Health, Hims and Hers were started. But then when you kind of look at the numbers and realize the number of people we've been able to reach is so much more, despite kind of maybe being smaller in revenue terms. I think that's when it like really hits hard, or that's when sort of it's put into perspective.
How has that changed your view on competition?
Competition within India?
And abroad?
I think so. Right now we're building largely for India. The view on competition in India is that like you guys were talking about TG, right? So there's a lot of companies doing D2C skin and hair care. A lot of cool solid brands have been built out. There's platforms, marketplaces that have catered to just teleconsults. You go to Practo or an Apollo, so like established hospital networks, or even like a sort of health tech platform like a Practo. And then there's marketplaces, verticalized platforms that have catered to beauty, that have catered to online pharmacy, catered to even like home decor, and now quick commerce is obviously, you started with that whole sensible idea of catering to grocery, but anything that is quick and convenient. What my thinking has been the last sort of 2 years is that there is competition. We overlap a little bit with a lot of these players that are already somewhat intersecting in our market. But that entire value of service that a new age like dermatology, skin and hair consumer in India knows very well and can avail on a single unified platform, that is going to stay with us for the long term. And that's the sort of space we're evolving into. So the view on competition, to answer your question, is that there's a lot of overlap with what I'd call like semi-competitors. But that exact experience that, bread and butter dermatology consumers want, will hopefully stay with us in the years to come.
Right. Mm-hmm. And that allows you to build a very, very powerful product.
A very, very
for
powerful
the long
product.
term.
Yeah, very, very powerful product, platform, and start doing cool stuff offline also.
Exactly.
Like our, online, for example, now is telling us we're getting some really interesting data on, where people are consulting for what conditions, from what pin codes, how many times a year, in what seasons. All of that is like setting us up really well for a potential offline future targeted offline strategy.
Just your data in and of itself is so valuable. That's
It's
incredible.
rich, especially the consultation data.
Yes. Wow.
That's telling us a lot more, but even the sort of the intersection of consult and product purchase is telling us a lot. Mm-hmm. You could have, pin codes where we see, let's say, the highest number of consult users that are repeat product purchasers. For, sometimes we find out it's in one part of India during the monsoon, hair loss. Mm-hmm. In another part of India during, deep winter season, eczema and dry skin. Mm-hmm. So the data is valuable. I'd really like for it to be a lot larger, build up over the next 2-3 years, and then would like to start making sort of targeted offline moves as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was reading a few of the reviews of customers on your website, and one of the main things that I got was they're very happy and impressed with the products that you guys make. And
you're talking about our private label?
Yes.
Okay.
And one of the main themes was your private label. When they use products from that, they get really fast results without any side effects, and that's not something they're used to with any other products. And so what are you doing differently? Because skincare is a very large market, right?
Yeah,
so I would assume that everyone in skincare is trying to do the absolute best they can, because there's a lot of money to be made. So what are you doing differently that's helping you achieve things like this and beating out all of the competition?
So if you look at our private label, it's still growing. Mm-hmm. It's kind of an enabler in the sense that it is, it kind of helps get our name out there. Mm-hmm. Though the core business for us currently is the marketplace and the consultations. The private label is just sort of 8-9 products out of 5,000 that we list on the marketplace. Mm-hmm. But it's something that also came later in the game, right? We only introduced it about a year, 14 months ago. And I think the simple philosophy we followed there is that we have so many doctors in-house helping us with consultations. We have doctors that, helped us basically put the company together from ground up. And so it was a lot of like bringing these consultants and advisors together to survey, the quality of products they've seen, map to, issues that they've seen that can be addressed without having to use drugs and, products there's this concept basically called cosmeceuticals. So our products will fall in that category where it's basically kind of a hybrid between pharmaceutical and cosmetic.
Okay.
That's how it extracts. So it's like obviously not as tame or just look and feel as like a beauty product, but it's also does not have as many side effects or like strict sort of drug components and formulations as, let's say, prescription grade products. And what happens is they're basically it's more of an informal, not so much a scientific term, but the formulations behind these are scientific. They are basically the ingredients are balanced out, just short of being prescription grade products. But they also are blended with, like, let's say, the fragrance or the feel good, touch and feel goodness of like cosmetics, traditional cosmetics. So it's basically blending science from pharmaceuticals and cosmetics, and that is actually what a large part of the dermatology market functions on. That's a large part of what dermatologists write. Needless to say, they're slightly on the higher end of the price spectrum. So like average skin and hair in India, brand play would be 600, 650, maybe 700. Our private label is a 1200 to 1250 average selling price. And the fact that they were crafted with doctors and it took a long time. So we sort of put a lot of thought into the formulation. And they're private labeled, not white labeled, meaning that formulation is like almost patented to us. So there's all that effort, and also I'd say like surveying and need finding from doctors who've helped us identify certain voids. So these products, they're only 8-9 so far. We're obviously going to expand depending on how things evolve in the coming years. The number of products we have in our private label portfolio. But the ones right now all catering to very, very specific like niches in like skincare or hair care.
Do you think that'll be one of your biggest money maker?
I'd say in the future, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. I think money maker and
impact,
like
as
a
well.
great market impact for sure, and like I'd say quite a sustainable marketing strategy, because
yes, that makes
the
sense.
private label, whether or not it's eponymous to us, is usually identified back to Clinikally.
Yes.
And one of the things we've enabled is taken a lot of. Was it off?
Yep.
For how long?
I don't know. I just checked. That's why I keep checking every
I
now and
hope
then.
it wasn't off since the alarm rang.
No. I switched it on then. So
Okay.
that's why I checked once before and it was on. But
Huh.
I don't know when it went off.
It's on now.
We'll find out. Yeah, it's on now.
Should I?
No, it's fine.
Yeah,
We'll-
let's restart the podcast, dude. What an honor to have you on. Oh,
yeah, it's fine. Yeah, it happens. We have the audio for the entire thing anyway, so it's fine.
So basically,
Yeah.
I'd say that with the private labels, perhaps they'll end up being money makers for sure, but they'll also help establish or help enable us bring out, since we always think of ourselves as such a healthcare or clinical first company, help bring out those foundations right in a physical product for people to use. Even today, like how they're out in the market is largely through dermatologist recommendations. So we have about 250-300 dermatologists who are like early adopters and have been gracious enough to shelf these products at their clinics. And so basically the idea is that it has prescription value. They are written in prescriptions day in, day out, and that's how people find the private label. We're not sort of marketing them at the moment through traditional sort of D2C or other marketplace strategies. With the ostensible idea is just to build up sort of good early data that they work and make a meaningful difference to people's lives.
And I think that word of mouth recommendation
Yeah.
coming from a dermatologist always holds more value.
Exactly.
So,
And we are in a space right now where we can do that because our sort of core business is still the platform, the marketplace, the online pharmacy that actually curates so many other brands, and the telehealth. So that's anyways kind of running full steam, continues to grow every month.
That makes sense. And are you looking to include some machine learning type of stuff into your formulation of products, or is that something that's not on the horizon?
I mean, I've explored it just purely out of like personal interest,
Yeah.
and curiosity, and because I was looking at like that AlphaFold,
Yeah.
which is that sort of the DeepMind model for protein folding, and I guess now they can map to so many other
Yes.
an actual molecule. So I was looking at that, and through that, I've seen there are a couple of kind of companies that are I guess fine-tuned AlphaFold on skincare product and hair care product formulations.
Okay. Interesting.
And try to come out with it. And there's very like, to be very honest with you, there is a real play there. But the few discussions we've had within sort of Clinikally have amounted to the fact that it would be cool to try these tools out, but they'd still have to be like ultimately reviewed by the doctor. The exact formulation, the set of ingredients, and then it could work well, which I think interestingly is a theme with any kind of physician facing or healthcare based AIs, right? Like if you can have, especially where the stakes are high, and this, like here we're talking about a product that we will probably want to commercialize to lakhs, maybe crores of people, then that having a doctor review that final formulation is always going to be helpful.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, so I think that's probably an approach we will follow. If we're able to find kind of an engine or a model that's reliable enough. AlphaFold obviously right now seems hyper focused on like actual drug discovery and not kind of consumer facing FMCG formulations. But I have seen a couple of cool companies. I should check out the space actually now that you mentioned. There's this company, these sort of D2C brands I've seen in the US that claim to have products that are like fully AI generated formulation. I don't know if you've seen any of them.
No.
So there are a few companies playing on that.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
It's an interesting future we have with AI,
Yeah.
especially using it as a tool for all of these things.
I think healthcare though there's so much merit in the healthcare use case because healthcare is not very accessible in a lot of parts of the world. I live in America and I don't think that healthcare there is accessible at all.
Yeah.
It's far too expensive and I can do nearly nothing there. My physio over here costs like 1/10 of the price.
That's the thing in America, like anything that's like super specialized, you can go and figure out it'll work. But anything that's like normal, run of the mill, you could have a fever, you could want to go to a physio, You're just like struggling to find the right answer, the right solution.
And why do I have to wait 6 days for an appointment? Like healthcare should be accessible. Getting a problem diagnosed should be accessible. And that does not exist. But I think when you bring AI into healthcare as a use case, those things become a lot faster.
Yeah, absolutely.
And today I got an MRI report, I plugged into ChatGPT and I had a 10-minute conversation about my MRI report with ChatGPT and I learned far more than what the orthopedic told me. So just that was enough for me to understand that there's so much future for what healthcare can do with AI.
You should be careful about the hallucinations and stuff.
and if you don't want them, you should check out which is that model that does a really MedPalm.
Okay.
MedPalm. You've heard of MedPalm?
No.
So that's Google's model that performs basically better on most medical benchmarks.
Okay, I thought Claude was the one that was doing really well. So
Claude is also better than GPT for medical use cases.
I'll get a second opinion.
Like a lot of these evals are now kind of they're not very trustworthy, right? Because they're all just, you'd know this, you've published recently. They're all basically for conference and paper's sake. But MedPalm is Google's model that basically has performed has done some of the best met some of the best benchmarks for all kinds of medical use cases. There's another company that you can check out called GVAI.
What do they do?
And see if you can reach out to the founder for the pod.
Okay.
They're basically trying to create like a comprehensive healthcare AI assistant. India-based company.
Okay.
They just got a check from Andrew Ng's AI fund.
Oh wow.
So they're the first company in India effectively that Andrew Ng has deployed money into.
Oh wow.
And they're doing like a comprehensive healthcare AI assistant, and their model actually, I'm forgetting what it's called, but it's obviously GV something, and I think it's like a hyper fine-tuned version of Llama.
Okay.
Their model is up there on I think it's like number one on the the medical benchmark on Hugging Face right now.
Oh wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah, and they're actually an India-founded company.
That's interesting. Yeah, I was. So I listen to Andrew Huberman's podcast a lot.
Yeah.
And one day I was just thinking about something he said about sleep or just general wellness, and I couldn't be bothered to actually go through find the actual information. So I used Llama, built a RAG around all of his podcasts, transcribed everything, and so and then run that just on some medical questions that I found a thread on Reddit, just general medical stuff, and it performed surprisingly well. Yeah. So the use cases for just AI helping out people with all of these things is definitely very interesting. So that's definitely something that excites me a lot.
Yeah, very exciting actually. I'm glad you brought this up because this is a space that I'm very passionate about and very interested in. And at some point in my life would want to, deep dive into more. I think also like the sort of MedPalm was one example. There's a lot of like models. So like you did GPT-4, right? I'm guessing 4.0. It's not even like specifically fine-tuned on medical data.
Yeah.
Like imagine if you got hold of a model that was fine-tuned on medical data.
Exactly.
Try it out though.
I'm going to give both a shot. Yeah. I'll report back at the end.
See if you can. Claude might be better, but that's also kind of a general purpose model. It hasn't like specifically. But see if you can try MedPalm. There's a MedPalm 2 also now.
Oh wow! Okay.
It's by Google. MedPalm is by Google. It's basically kind of built on top of Gemini, I'm guessing. Yeah.
Man, the iterations are so rapid that to catch wind of everything that's happening, someone said this to me literally like 2 nights ago at the party. They were like, whatever you do in your life now, just future-proof yourself with AI. And I'm like...
Someone told you this where?
I'm like, dude, it's 4 in the morning and you're hammered.
Someone told you this where?
At the party on Friday.
People were talking about AI then?
He gave me a hug and he was like, dude, hear me out. I'm like, tell me, what's up?
People were talking about AI?
This guy.
Wow.
He was really passionate. I said, I'll hear you out. I wanna heavily shift gears.
Sure.
And I want to talk about your relationship with money.
I knew that was coming.
Yeah, and I think that we've had conversations with people who've done very different things in their life, but as a business owner, you've raised funds, you've worked in industry, and now you run your own business. How do you, I guess, cultivate a good relationship with money in that process?
And how does that relationship change over time also? Because I feel like the ability to coast through life is important. You don't want to just go through life, but that ability, that frees you up.
I think the one thing I will say, and also because this is perhaps the context in which I've given this the most amount of thought, is that I'd say for milestones that you set for yourself, certain age you want to have accomplished XYZ. For me, I think one of the things that I've always thought about is investing. And that kind of started out with, very early on, like perhaps the first internship I had, a good part of what I made was invested in the stock markets, and that sort of, must have been early 2015, 2016, helped me, cultivate the idea for, okay, this much, I've kind of built out this project, I'm getting compensated for it, and now I want to responsibly kind of invest it somewhere. And that, I think, the earlier you start that, and that will take many different shapes and forms, right? Like, I want to be able to do well enough to angel invest and give back, in like tangible financial terms to founders, the way I'd been given when I started off. And it all comes back to that same theme of that, if at least I think of kind of a good relationship with money is one that has like a sensible amount of investing, and thinking about that investing as, a way of, like a short way of indexing on the future, but not just in terms of, obviously one is your own future and however you safeguard it with having money invested in assets that will appreciate, but also indexing on the future when, tomorrow when I feel like I want to start angel investing, to whatever extent I, have some of my own money to do so, you are kind of indexing in helping others create a future, right? So I think for me, I don't like as such have, I've obviously, and I guess since we're getting deep here, I have to say that one is fortunate. I grew up, fairly privileged, but also seeing how hard earned that the sort of money that my parents have, whatever they've had in their household was so hard earned, through like working days and nights, saving people's lives. I brought up in Delhi, people would ask me, so what business is your dad in? And I developed this sort of system of saying very early on that he's in the business of saving lives. He's an OT right now, simple, right? So I'd say whatever my parents have earned is not quantifiable in money for me or for people that know them. It's quantifiable in terms of sort of goodwill, good work, and tireless efforts towards improving somebody's life. So I've always lived and grown up with that philosophy of, if you do work, you follow your passion, you create impact, somewhere money will follow. But then the sort of individualistic conception I developed is that you've got to sort of invest that back, right? And that investing safeguards future in two ways. You're being able to help create somebody else's future, as well as in a large part your own. And it also, I think, is a very like meaningful way of following, like I keep saying, whatever else is happening out in the world that you're not directly involved in. Be it another stock, be it another startup, be it an ETF. It's like a meaningful way of researching and learning something else that, especially as a business owner, is not, remotely involved with what I'm doing. And then it kind of traces back to, okay, this is the money I've earned, this is the salary I've taken, this is what I built my company out of, and now I am parking this somewhere else. But if you have that underlying thought of that I'm parking this somewhere else to, obviously safeguard my own future, but also perhaps index on creating a better future for however many other people may touch and walk along that path. That's how I've always kind of thought about that idea. And obviously, like, being able to like have enough of it on my own, before like I set out to maybe raise a family, is an important part of how I view it, especially at this point in time in my life.
Is that family in the near future?
Not so much.
No.
Not so much. I think that's where I'm a very like stringently kind of driven by the sort of milestones and ambitions I've set for myself. I think I'm quite focused on building the company right now, but also getting it to a point whereby I can look back and tell myself that I've done something with my life, let alone being responsible for someone else's.
Do you feel like a lot of what drives you is the legacy that you're going to leave behind?
Yeah, I think both. I think it's the legacy that I'm going to leave behind. And it's also the number of people that I've helped to get somewhere in life. I think that's a very important part of it. Like, if I think for me, at the end of, let's say each day, or perhaps more macro, at the end of each year, if I've impacted somebody's life positively, helped them out in a way, shape or form that perhaps may even be intangible, that's really a big part of me moving forward in life. And then obviously, kind of, when you have a business, there's a broader, more concretized platform within which you can do that.
Yep, exactly.
Right, but also on a personal level, I feel like so being able to give back is a big part of what I feel like, maybe 4-5 decades down my life will strike me as gratifying or having being fulfilled.
You know what I love about your mind? I feel like in the last 2 hours I've just been taking in a lot from your mindset, and I feel like it's the same for you. You have a very mature and sophisticated view of the world, and it's hard to arrive to that. You seem to have done a lot of work on your mind, like your relationship with your family, money, building a close circle. How do you get there to put yourself in a position where you can be so mature, so polished, so sophisticated, and work hard and play hard at the same time?
How do I take any of these compliments now without saying no? None of that is. No, I don't. I think you're overselling me. No. I'm just honestly saying what I feel. what like deeply like means a lot to me, and I think what I spend a lot of my time thinking about, right? And or maybe I think about it this way, right? A lot of what I'm saying is what I look for and try to seek out in people the most when I'm talking to them, no matter what the context. But I think these are a lot of the things that I try to get inspired by,
Yeah.
that I try to learn, that I try to imbibe. I think it's more that not some know-it-all, but these are the things that I think I find most exciting when I find vocalized in some context or the other.
Right.
In the next 3 to 5 years, when you look at your life personally and professionally, what are some things that you're currently working on that you want to be a lot better at? And when you look back in those after 3 to 5 years, what would have to change, or what kind of growth would have to happen for you to say, okay, these past years were a success?
So the first part of it was like, what do you want? What should I change?
What are you currently working on that is your focus for the next foreseeable future? And then when you look back, what should have happened, which will make you say that I spent the last few years well?
I think one of the things that is front and center for me is is just kind of leading by example, walking the talk as a leader.
Mm-hmm.
And as kind of more and more people join the company and have so much of their livelihood, their growth, professional and personal, tied to what I've set up, I think that responsibility increases a lot. So making sure that I'm obviously able to justify people, both employees, users, doctors across the country, trusting their time, effort with my platform or what I've built in some way or the other, consequently means that I feel like I need, and there's a lot more I need to do to just be able to kind of lead by better, walk the talk better, any number of things, conflict resolution, kind of making sure I'm regular about checking in, ensuring that work is as fun as it's serious. There's a lot of different variables that I think of. There's 3-4 that I named right now. But yeah, I think broadly, like being, the best possible leader and never for a minute getting complacent, especially with like the leadership aspect of things, is one of the things I want to continue to work on. And will hopefully be able to say 3 to 5 years from now at least tried to make an effort towards. I think that's one thing. The other one, like we've already discussed right now, and I find it very consequential and important, is to just make sure I always keep up with what's happening in the world.
Mm-hmm.
For me, largely that looks like sort of technology. And I think because that's a large part of what shaped me, a large part of what excites me about where the world is headed, and India specifically. So making sure I kind of keep in touch with things, even though they may not be 100% related to or involved with my day-to-day work, but in some shape or form, broaden my horizons and maybe help me bring ideas that I can tie back to work. So like kind of staying aware, continuing to read a lot, and like kind of continuing to sort of build up that side of my personality is also very important to me. I think the third thing I would say that is a big focus area for me right now is to sort of try to kind of create more and more ways for like, and this is like very personal, not so related to kind of Clinikally, though we are doing it in some shape or form at Clinikally, is to create more and more ways, like Rohan touched on this earlier, more and more ways for folks that haven't had the kind of opportunities that I may have had to just kind of seek mentorship, advice, brainstorming, and be able to kind of build companies. I mean, I had a lot of support when I started out, so very grateful. But just kind of offer a proxy or some sort of, thing that puts together that support for them, that's very important to me. I think 3 to 5 years from now, if I will have helped people start companies like Clinikally, and especially, you know, considering where I want Clinikally to go 3 to 5 years from now, I think that'll also have been quite an achievement for myself. Yeah, because I think that's just like enablement and looking out for others, it just strengthens, you know, the ecosystem that one is now in. These 3 things I think are of very high importance to me right now.
You mentioned like keeping up with tech, because that's something that shaped you, and tech, and that also excites you a lot for the future of India. Do you think that the lack of fundamental research is a problem for India and that needs to change, or do you think the fundamental research happening in America is good enough and we just build?
No, I absolutely think we need more fundamental research in India, more deep tech for sure. More appetite for deep tech investing.
Okay.
So there was that whole conversation, I don't know if you guys followed, but basically when Sam Altman was here last year, he did like a little talk in and it was, I think it was ET or someone, he did a little town hall. Somebody asked him, you know, if it's possible for like a couple of Indians, like 2-3 Indians with just 10 million of funding to build a foundational model that can compete with like the likes of, I think it was GPT 3.5 at the time. So that like that, and that was like one of the big sort of VCs of India had asked, I'm forgetting who it was. But like that's just, I bring up that story, right? Because that's one sort of indicator of what the mindset is. That sure, India is like known for frugal innovation. You know, Jugaad is a big part of it, and I'm like, one is so proud of that. But that mindset also then dominates what could potentially be like deep tech fundamental research.
Yes.
And what could potentially be like, okay, you know, rather than investing in like one brand, an apparel brand, and a suitcase brand, and a, you know, another brand.
Yes.
Why not channel some capital towards fundamental long-term research that has maybe a 15 to 20 year go-to-market? You know, like generic manufacturing is a big innovation that's come out of India.
Yes.
Right? Why not sort of the next wave or whatever is in biotech? Or and I think that's something that is going to be very important in the future. I'm not sure what the pathways are, because that sort of, you know, there's also like not as much a concept of university spin-outs here. So there's phenomenal research happening. You look at like an IIT, you look at, I mean, IIT, anyone will cite, but you even look at like I was talking to somebody at IISC, which is the Institute of Statistical Sciences in Bangalore. They're doing some phenomenal work on longevity and anti-aging research, but they're barely funded. And so like then people in the private spaces have to come in and fund them. But there's a huge gap between kind of the like knack, inclination, academic prowess for fundamental research I've seen, and the sort of capital pools for it, right? So ultimately, if you read, there's an article you should read. It came out in the ARC 2 days ago, that why anybody starting in biotech or deep tech ends up incorporating in the US and then having access to capital there, which is also fine. I mean, I think as long as kind of scientists in India trying to do pioneering research, whether it be like, you know, biotech, climate tech, there needs to definitely be like more of an appetite. I have this friend who is doing a very cool climate tech company right now, and he was actually part of my 3 months ago, part of my cohort of 1-2 new people being met every week, and we've gone quite close, hit it off quite a lot, and he is basically, interesting story. We'll get him on the pod too.
I love this.
You will love chatting with him. He's like a Ashoka undergrad, went to Oxford for 3 years.
Yeah.
Almost thought he stayed there. He then came back sort of a little unexpectedly to basically help his family run a couple of these tea estates, large tea estates that they own across Bengal. And one of the things he's come and done along with his 2 brothers, I think one of them is a chemical engineer, the other one's also some sort of an engineer, and he's like a full international climate law type of guy.
Okay.
So they come together with these sort of, you know, diverse backgrounds, and the reason I mention is, and they're trying to do something called enhanced weathering. They've basically set up. Have you heard of the concept?
No.
I learned it from him very recently. So they've basically set up a climate tech company based on trying to churn out an enhanced weathering process out of the unutilized land they have in their tea plantation. He's a cool guy, but he's one person trying to do very fundamental research, because there's only from what he tells me, some 8-9 companies across the world that are being able to run successful enhanced weathering based carbon credit certificates, or based decarbonization is what it's called, right? Yes. And the idea is that tomorrow you'll have all of big tech and everyone from a Shopify to a Stripe to cloud providers, data centers, buying carbon credits, right? Just to reduce their carbon footprint and essentially have carbon credits on their balance sheet. That's the kind of fundamental thing I've understood from start to scratch on what he's doing. And he's building this out of literally Darjeeling.
Wow.
Which is cool, right? And it's like they're imagining a whole new revenue stream for his family's traditional business. But ultimately, capital in India non-starter.
Yeah, that seems like a...
People will take a really long time to understand it, but the whole focus of his conversations with me over the last few months have just been XYZ US investor, which is still fine.
But that's so unfortunate to hear. There's so much cool shit that people are doing.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate that the understanding is not at the level that it is in the Western world.
I think to give credit where it's due also, right, is that because VC and sort of generally early stage startup investing is still so nascent in India, right? You're on sort of in the early waves where, that focus on, for a lot of the funds, the focus on delivering tangible returns through quicker go-to markets is a heavier one.
Yeah.
And then maybe I would feel in the next evolution or the ones after that, when a lot of, funds have seen multiple life cycles in India, return capital, they'll perhaps start being supported for riskier and longer go-to-market bets, right? That's kind of my one theory on how things could evolve. But cool example, right? Very technical stuff. They're having some independent climate body doing a research paper on whether these guys meet 17, 18 sufficient metrics for even qualifying to generate the carbon credit. But if they do, they manage to get some really cool customers across the globe.
And every company would want that on their balance sheet.
Yeah, exactly.
Apple's also trying to be carbon neutral by I think 2030. Everyone's going to try to
There's something called the Frontier Summit or Frontier Climate Action, basically, where he was explaining to me there's Meta, Shopify, Stripe, a couple of the really big tech names have set up a $1 billion pre-purchase commitment for carbon credits.
Wow.
So all of these companies that are essentially doing decarbonization can eat into that portion of an early commitment.
That's huge.
Yeah.
Wow.
Frontier Labs. It's called Frontier Labs, I think. It's set up by a consortium of these guys.
Wow. I like that you're very well connected to people who are doing that kind of stuff in India.
I like to be. I think that has been literally eye-opening for me.
Yeah.
How did you start on that?
Truth be told, you're in that space right now, and I for whenever you guys come back, I know Ribov, you're coming back sooner. That is one of the biggest things you need to be open to, I feel.
Oh, 100%.
Right? And I did not have that level of openness, right? I thought that, yes, I've managed to get traction and hit the ground running with a product much faster than I would have in the US, and perhaps I've just been doing a job there. But also, are there people doing cool things in India?
Exactly.
And in fact, my barometer is always, are there people that are doing things that are much cooler, much more technical than what I'm doing? Right? Finding those people has been a real journey of discovery.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's where the disconnect is for me. I'm very open and I look for that. It's just hard to find.
Yeah, it is.
And so
you have to go above and beyond.
Yes.
But you're so connected to the ecosystem, right?
Yeah.
That you're just manifesting that energy all the time and you're in those circles. But for someone who isn't, how do you get to that?
I think one of the ways I've arrived at that is you just have to really branch outside of your comfort zone, right? So for example, tangibly,
yes,
what that could mean is you come across an interesting article, LinkedIn profile, don't hesitate to reach out. Just be like, yo, I'm so and so. I just moved back. I have a background in this. Really love the work you're doing. Would like to catch up. I've reached out to a ton of people like that, and vice versa. I've heard from a ton of people, doing that kind of thing. That's one very big one, right? Sometimes just the hesitation to branch out of your comfort zone, especially when you have your set crew and friends and people you've grown up with around, is that I think is a very big hurdle in and of itself.
Yeah.
That okay, I've got my scene or this or that sorted. I know who I'm hanging out with when. So why look at somebody who's so outside of my world? That in itself is a big one. But now I think that I can say unabashedly that I am always doing. I think the other one is try to attend events like you say, like you won't realize, but there's venture capitalists, some of the big funds in India. I've been fortunate to get to know a lot of the partners there that host events where they try to bring together founders all the time. That in itself also ends up being, it's a very simple but approachable way of meeting people that are naturally going to be building outside of your sort of knowledge space, just because these guys collect founders. So it's like that whole thing of like networking events, but doing so in the real world. Or if you want to do it personally at your own level, like you read an article about somebody, you find somebody's profile. Ask me now. that's the third way.
Did you ever go for Cougar Nights in the Bay Area?
I did not. More than 4 or 5 times. Great way to connect with people.
Yeah, exactly.
I would recommend.
Great people watching Sitch. You know what Cougar Nights are?
No, I don't.
Let him explain it.
Go ahead.
I don't. So on Sandhill Road, which is also most famous for being sort of the like VC road of the world, right? So you'll see some of the top tier, best of the best venture capital firms being headquartered on Sandhill Road. There happens to be this extremely posh hotel, which is kind of folklore dictates that that's where you'll see like your Mark Andreessen have his usual breakfasts closing around with the founder. Is pretty much true.
Yeah.
And so it's at a hotel called Rosewood Sandhill.
Okay.
And then on Thursdays they have something called Cougar Nights.
Okay.
Self-explanatory.
Understood. I was
just painting the sort of
picture.
I was just getting you to visualize it.
I was wondering if that was a different interpretation to that.
On Thursdays they have Cougar Nights.
Yeah.
And
people show up.
People show up. It becomes more of a thing. I'd say for me, like junior and senior, it was more of a thing. I didn't know about it until like junior year or senior year, but people do show up, and it's a lot of like Stanford people you'll see there.
Okay, interesting. And the motivation behind coconut, is it actually anything to do with... No, it's not. Okay.
I don't think there's any motivation.
No,
okay, fair.
There
is motivation, it's just not with... Oh, okay. Okay, interesting.
That was a hard switch, huh?
So much. It was so well connected to you just meeting new people, being so open to being out of your comfort zone.
No, when you started that, I really thought like there was some aspect of entrepreneurship, something to it. But then straight... I mean, I guess there is some aspect of entrepreneurship to that, but fair enough. But yeah.
I never run into anyone at Cougar Night.
Dude, yeah, that's surprising because when I was invited that same night, we'll talk about this off the record, but there was some very hard hitters.
Really?
That specific evening.
I've heard, man, but I never saw in the times that I remember. I used to go with hard hitters, and I was like, you're not looking for hard hitters there.
Speaking of Stanford students and Cougar Nights, this has been a phenomenal conversation. You've had an incredible journey. If you could leave anyone in their 20s listening to this with
really think I'm overqualified for...
With a couple of pieces of advice.
You're very humble.
What would you say?
We're not gonna switch on the banter. Because I heard you guys tell me you had a banter podcast before this.
Yeah, we should.
I don't want mine to be all like serious, motivational speaking.
Browse
in your life. Don't do that in your life.
I was gonna ask
You'll
you.
like leave with me thinking I'm only a serious guy that's not capable of too much fun.
No, we saw the other side this weekend.
We saw the regenerate Arjun this weekend. It was fantastic.
We saw what you're capable of.
I barely saw your eyes open the entire weekend.
Oh my god.
It was fantastic.
I didn't think I could do the podcast without that kind of a weekend.
No, you just have so much to offer and honestly a lot of wisdom. I know you're gonna laugh at this now, I see that. But we had to, like, it was just, we had to get a lot of that information out of you.
But okay, on a serious note,
Yes.
what is it that you think people in their 20s?
If you could leave them
the
with
most?
some pieces of advice, what would it be?
I'd say take risks. This is a time, that you're going to look back at in your life and feel like you either should have taken risks or were adequately rewarded for taking a risk, one way or another. The second thing is, and this is, I think, a common theme amongst, and so obviously the first one is that idea of just like learning to try and fail, no matter what the scale is. For me, like, a lot of times randomly, and you probably experienced this when you did a startup, a lot of times I just, through college, get up and apply to YC for an idea that, was not even fully fleshed out.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of gets you going with that idea of thinking of something seriously, putting shape and structure to it. So I feel like that whole idea of, taking a risk to do something that, where you have absolutely nothing to lose but a lot to gain,
Mm-hmm.
is definitely one that I'd love to see more people, hop onto to whatever extent is possible and feasible for them. And I think the other thing I'd say is, kind of the theme I see with a lot of people is, in their 20s is just kind of trying to like move very fast from one thing to the next thing, quick outcome, quick realization of efforts. And I mean, I'm saying this because I've been in that boat as well. I've been, very impatient. I've been, kind of rattled when, things didn't work out in quick succession. So this is kind of more a reflection of my own experiences, but also the fact that, and now kind of I'm learning this as I'm, getting closer to hitting my 30s, but it's that fact that, sometimes you're just going to have to wait and be patient. Like, patience is a key virtue. Just because I'm saying that, literally I have myself been a very impatient person, for a good part of my life. Having a company to run now, to see through somewhere, having investors backing on the other side, definitely, helps putting a lot of things together by way of just, adding system, adding structure, and a lot of patience to what you want to accomplish. Like, if you want to impact millions of lives, it's going to take a while. It'll probably not happen overnight. Sure, like the soonest you can do it is maybe months, years, whatever. But I've seen that it's just important to be patient. Like, that's the one thing it's the hardest to tell somebody that's in their 20s. It's the hardest for me to still try to live by. Like, I'm still inherently a very impatient person, and a lot of why I'm saying this is just because that's another thing that I'm working on, in fact.
Mm-hmm.
Coming back to your earlier question. So I'd say those two things.
Is impatience something you want? Because I'm very impatient. Is it? He feels that. Is that something that really needs to be changed, especially in your early 20s? Because it gives you that sense of urgency. And sure, it might not be extremely healthy mentally or whatever.
Yeah.
But you're in your early 20s. Fuck health, like build something, right?
That's definitely there. I think I'm not taking away from that aspect of it,
Mm-hmm.
but then if you're building something, you gotta like wait it out a little bit. Just add structure to the process and make sure
Okay.
you've given it your best before things come together.
Mm-hmm.
And also impatient in the sense that kind of I see a lot of people like maybe jumping from perhaps one idea to the next,
Mm-hmm.
not wanting to like test things out with like
so
user
like that.
feedback. This is like, let's say, people building things, right?
Yes.
But there's many other versions of it out there, but it's just that idea of kind of being very quick and racy and next thing. And I've experienced that. I still, have my fair share of that in my life. But I think especially when you really kind of find what you're up to and at least, make something your life's work, for whatever duration, you're going to have to be patient, I think. Patient with people, patient with what you're building, what you're doing, what you're waiting or sort of manifesting to happen. Any of those things. So I'd say like patience and risk taking, not kind of, take one, not with one taking away from the other.
Okay.
Taking risks more just to try and fail, right? But patience then perhaps as a second step when you're trying something, patience then will involve, talking to people about it, brainstorming, sitting down with a lot of people that may have built in the same space until you can really hammer down your concepts. And like just going above and beyond with trying to learn something new. It becomes hard, right? I feel like understand after college and stuff, it does become hard, right? Because especially when you're building a startup, there's like, and I mentioned this earlier, there's like a whole new sense of like unstructured structure that's going to come into your life, and being comfortable with that does require patience.
Okay, interesting. Unstructured structure.
That's so perfectly put. I feel like I have too many notes.
Now I'm going to reflect on these. So many. I think, like, at least selfishly, one of the reasons I wanted to start this is because we talk to people like you about all of these things, and we're in similar boats in our life, and it's just free advice. And that's
You're thinking of moving back as well at some point, or what's the? Sorry, you'll be there for a while.
Not right now. I'm an American citizen to start with.
Yeah.
But I want to give myself at least another 2-3 years there. I want to give myself a chance at getting out of consulting, moving into doing something.
This is a solid way of keeping up with what's happening in India and with I really love this.
The part?
Yeah.
I think that's the
fact
intention.
that you can do this and still be there, because obviously it's like so virtual friendly, is a really cool idea.
Yeah. It came out of literally these kind of conversations.
It's literally like the best of both worlds. You're keeping that option open.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
hopefully in the process kind of get to meet cool people.
And that's the thing you mentioned earlier, being open to talking to a lot of people. And like I've been deep in the research, deep in tech for, the last 6-7 years, right? And when you're so deep in that, it kind of, the rest of the world gets away from you. And so this is another way, at least for me, to get back out there.
That's really true. That's
so,
what I'm saying.
Yeah. So
the rest of the world just kind of moves along.
It just goes away.
Exactly.
But there are equally interesting things happening in a parallel universe that you don't want to miss out on.
Exactly.
And like for me at least, I don't know if you feel the same. Living in New York, you get so disillusioned to everything.
New York's hectic like that.
Because it's fucking hectic and non-stop. I feel like, this, I've been very fortunate with the kind of people I've been able to meet in my life. Through my own family, through Mamu, and through my own network.
Yeah.
It only felt right to put myself in a position where I could have these conversations which were raw, which were authentic.
Yeah.
Where we spent the entire weekend together. We could not have we could not have had these conversations. Because you can't get to that level.
Really, you talk to somebody about it.
I had a 3-minute conversation with him.
About the future of
Yeah, that's it. That's it, 3 minutes.
They're like, GPT-5 is going to have these many parameters.
Yeah, exactly.
Short. No, I agree. I think it's like, it's a cool way to inspire and be inspired. Both.
It's selfish.
Yeah.
It's very selfish.
It's selfish yet not selfish.
But that's something that's perfect, right? Because you take from it whatever you do. But literally, like every minute of your conversation is eye-opening, or some part of it is eye-opening to some part of your audience.
Exactly. That's the idea, I think, right? If people can take away any single
I really like this dude. You guys should like scale it up. Like make
That's
it
the
big.
plan.
What do you
That's
suggest?
What do you have in mind?
Right now,
You want to have like a team and all of that, or
I think right now we've
Sure.
thought of just mostly editors.
We want editors. We want. We really want to get the short form content out there. So like there'll be a lot of bits from this podcast as well. So someone to make reels out of that to get the word out there. So that's from like the marketing and growing kind of perspective. But just from what we want to do with the podcast ourselves, we just want to scale it up. Keep talking to people like you. We want to get.
I'll come back when it's scaled up also. Huh?
Absolutely.
Facts, dude, no
we
doubt.
keep getting you.
100%.
But yeah,
but it's cool. Like, you've done some amazing conversations, and I obviously knew about it. I had run into it, without you guys even approaching me first. So there is, it's spreading. Like, the word of mouth story in and around here is strong. We should figure out how to get it out there. I feel like the one thing that could help is interviewing people from different cities.
Yes.
Like, naturally enough. Like, that's just the geographic diversity will only help your algorithm, catch some aspect of you diversifying. Short form content is a good idea. Yeah, I mean, we have a pretty decent social media strategy.
You have a very good social media.
So, but that's all premised and hinged on experts. So a lot of it is doctors talking, short form and long form. And a lot of it is now trying to also cater to sort of geographic pockets.
But see, the thing is, for you have tangible products you're selling. For us, this is our product.
So that's why I wasn't even thinking about us as a comparator. The only one thing I wanted to mention is experts and short form. Those are the only things you can take away from us.
Think about it this way. In this context, you're the expert. You are the product for the next 10 reels we put out. So our goal there is, how can we create the best, most attention-grabbing reels which attract people to listen to the full conversation.
But the hard thing with what you guys are trying to do is it has to be attention-grabbing yet deep. Like, that's a theme you want to maintain. It's unfiltered, deep, and like substantive.
We want people to take, like, from this conversation, I'm taking away a lot of what I should do when I come back. Right?
Yeah.
And there are other people in that boat. When they see these reels, they should know, okay, this is how it connects to my life. Oh, I should watch this.
Yeah.
We are having conversations, and we're going to continue having conversations with people who have a lot of these experiences and advice to offer. And so we just need to find an efficient way of getting that across to everyone, and that's the challenge. Especially without having any editing skills.
We're literally learning everything on the job. Yeah. Like camera positioning, this, that. Everything has happened.
That's cool.
In the last 9 episodes.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, that's another thing that I personally have struggled with before is, like, I think about things, I plan it, and then taking action is like, oh no, we can do this better. There are holes. So we just started. We just sent it.
But I feel like the quality and all for now is good. Like, as in, don't over-index on quality and devices and all of that too early.
Okay.
Like, obviously, it should be basic setup, great quality, should be editable into short form, long form, that's fine. But I feel like you guys have that nailed down.
Okay.
I would say let's focus on getting, like, solid people now. Like getting, like, people that have, amazing things to say, are, somewhat known for the work they're doing.
That's it.
Right? I think that, like, maybe we should start thinking now. And again, the theme I'm coming back to is that are from kind of different parts of the country.
Yeah. That's very true.
Depending on how, I don't know, you're thinking of your target speaker or whatever, not audience, target speaker. Yeah, we could, like, let's just start getting people that are doing, like, interesting things, like, kind of in maybe non-conventional fields.
Yeah.
Or have perspectives to offer from work that isn't happening in too many other places.
Exactly.
That kind of thing.
I think we've spoken about
we'll
this.
Make a list, yeah, and I'll definitely.
You've given us a list. We just need to hear this podcast again.
We're gonna play it back. We're gonna take all of this down.
You're gonna actually want to play it back.
No, we'll actually follow up on that. But we had this exact same conversation this weekend. The quality of our podcast growing is entirely indexed on the quality of guests. The better the guest, the better your podcast, because more people want to listen to quality guests.
Sure.
We have other friends also building podcasts.
Really?
The reason that we are so confident our podcast will be the fucking best podcast India's ever seen is because we'll bring the best quality guests.
And we'll ask some quality questions.
That's it. It's entirely rooted in quality. And if we can bring the best guests, that's word of mouth of just the guest coming. And then we have quality conversations.
India has some really big podcasters, but some of them, I won't speak for all of them, but some of them I've heard it, and the quality is, man, it angers me, honestly. It's bad. It's terrible. Like, they have experts on their podcast. He had an economic expert on the podcast, and he was asking him to define demand and supply for the audience. Fuck off, bro. Like, this is not what you're getting this caliber of people for, right? And there's definitely that gap that I think needs to be filled. in the Indian market for sure. And that's what you're talking about, getting guests on that are, doing unconventional things, and you having a startup in India, that's relatively unconventional.
Even unconventional, like sort of perspectives, experiences are also good idea.
Hence the name, Panoramic Perspectives.
Yeah, Panoramic Perspectives, exactly.
Like, there's no limit to the kind of people. The idea is just, can we bring on someone who has an interesting story, which in some capacity can be relatable to the people listening to it.
Got it. But we actually should get a good list together of people that I mentioned.
For sure.
Tane,
While listening back in this and editing this, I will collate that list and I will talk to you about that.
So Tane...
We asked Anish as well, because like we're close to him, he's a good guy, but he also did something relatively unconventional with Delhi Watch Company.
Yeah.
And it would just be a cool conversation to have.
Yeah, I think his story is cool because he's done it all alone.
All alone, man.
All alone.
And what an interesting model.
He's turned like an eye for good design into a real product, and that's tough to do. That's tough to do. Like, so many people like art, so many people like watches, so many people, like kind of niche things. He's turned it into a product with like quite a hustle. I've seen it happen. He's one of my very close friends. He would be a good guy to get.
He came to me yesterday at some point. He's like, bro, tomorrow make sure to ask Soin about Clinikally. He gets off on that shit.
Why would you not?
I'm like, bro, yes, of course.
This was yesterday. Yesterday he also sent me a message saying, save me.
From who?
Huh?
From who?
I don't know who it was. I think maybe the food, it was too overwhelming.
The Asian food or
the wok. The chili toast wok.
Today, can we keep that in? Do we have to take that out?
I missed out. I was busy meeting interesting people on the side.
Who did you meet at the Sangeet?
Sangeet, yes. Did you meet this guy called Anish? Not Anish.
Not Danwani. No.
Gawande.
No.
Should probably call him on the podcast too. Super interesting guy, dude.
Sorry for the abrupt ending to the pod, but we've already included a lot of extra stuff that we didn't think would actually make it to the pod. But anyway, that's everything. The camera stopped recording just before we did the actual outro. So this is that. Thank you, Arjun, for joining us on the pod. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you. The both of us learned a lot from you. It was a very insightful conversation, and so thank you for sharing all of that with us. Yeah, I think that's everything.